Sometimes love has a strange way of finding us, especially when we least expect it. The sun can shine brighter than ever, shining on a love that is worth every moment of the pain. This is how it all started. Kayla rummaged through her purse frantically. She was already at checkout point at the store, and she could not find the small purse where she kept her credit cards. She was quite sure she had put it in there before leaving her house for the store. The attendant stared at her impatiently, showing clearly that Kayla was wasting precious time. Kayla opened her mouth to say something, but she heard a deep voice behind her. "Put it in my account." Kayla turned around and came face to face with the tall figure of a man with the most striking eyes she had ever seen. He was a huge fellow with broad shoulders and neat black hair, a well-defined jawline, and a well-trimmed beard that covered his square chin. He smiled with both his sensuous lips and his dark eyes. Lost in the handsome looks of this male, Kayla's words stuck in her throat. She allowed him to pay her bill with his credit card, which he pulled out of his expensive-looking wallet. He scanned her face with his deep-set dark eyes, his gaze traveling down to her curvy, shapely body. She could see his appreciation of her beautiful body, even though this did not excite her at all. Her beauty had always attracted to her all kinds of men, the last one being Ben, her ex-boyfriend. Her slight confusion was interrupted by his voice. "May I?" he asked, taking her grocery bag in one hand and his own groceries in the other, and walking towards the store exit. She followed him quietly. There was something about this man that was very strong and commanding, and yet he had the sweetest smile. "Half to you." She heard his voice again as he asked her to lead him to her car. On reaching there, she opened the boot and he placed her groceries inside. "My name is Max," he said, stretching his hand to her. "Kayla." She introduced herself as she reached out to shake his hand. He held her hand longer than was necessary, and she had to quickly pull it away as their gaze met and held for a few moments. "Thank you very much for paying for my groceries." "You didn't have to," she stammered. "It was my pleasure," he said, smiling down at her, scanning her face and making her uncomfortable. This man really made her quite unsettled. She needed to leave before she made a fool of herself. "Just to wish you a great afternoon," she heard him say as he waved a goodbye to her. What? That was it? She thought to herself in some strange disappointment as she watched him walk away towards his car. Why didn't he ask for her number like all men did? She wondered, actually quite confused. Well, she thought, she was in this town to get away from a man and for some peace and quiet. The last thing she needed was another man in her way. She should be glad he never made any further move. But she wasn't. She finally got to her house. All the way home, she had meditated on her short encounter with Max, marveling at her disappointment that he never took further interest in her. What was wrong with her? The last thing she wanted was another failed relationship. Shouldn't she be happy that her meeting with Max was just that, an afternoon encounter? She remembered how difficult it was to get away from Ben, the guy she was in a relationship with for the last 1 year. It was an exhausting relationship. He constantly wanted attention and affirmation, and he never gave any in return. He was jealous and obsessive, and that, to him, was love. She could not take it anymore, and that is why she left. She wanted to be as far away from him as possible. When she finally settled in this small town, she was eager for some peace and quiet, and she had finally found it. Getting a job as a receptionist at a local hotel was not difficult. She had presented a beautiful resume, but she later realized, and to her disappointment, that the only qualification she ever needed was her large mane of curly hair, large almond eyes, and shapely body. Finally settling in her kitchen, she reached out for her grocery bag and for the umpteenth time wondered what happened to her credit cards. Could her small purse have fallen somewhere? She wondered. Did she leave it at home? She continued removing her groceries, reaching out into her bag to get yet another item. Right at the bottom of her bag was the small purse where she kept her credit cards. What a relief. But just as she was about to remove the last of her groceries, she felt something square in shape. Oops, what was that? It was something different. She got hold of it and pulled out and gasped. It was a man's wallet. It was Max's wallet. She recognized it from the store. What was it doing in her bag, she wondered. Looking inside it, she could see money and some cards. What is the meaning of this? She asked herself. In surprise, she opened the wallet and pulled out a business card. It read Max Timberlake Moke, architect. There was an address of a company and a phone number. She sat down at her kitchen table trying to understand the whole thing. Was this a deliberate thing he did? Did he put his wallet in her grocery bag on purpose? A strange excitement shot through her at the thought. Careful girl, she said to herself. The last thing she needed was an entanglement with another man. But why did her heart have to beat so fast at the thought of him? Should she call him? Maybe she should just forget about him. But what about his money and wallet? Shouldn't she return it to him? Her feelings were all mixed up. Finally, she made a decision that she would call him, but the only reason she would call was to return his money and his wallet. That was the only reason, or was it? The next day, Kayla picked up her cell phone nervously. She needed to call Max. She had decided not to call immediately. Last night she had thought about him and wondered what kind of man he was. If indeed he left his wallet in her grocery bag just to get her attention, why not simply ask for her number like all men did? Or was it a mistake that it simply fell into the bag without his knowledge? There was no way of knowing at this juncture, so she just went ahead and called him. She dialed the number on the card and waited as the phone rang at the other end of the line. She could not help feeling fear and nervousness. "Hello, Kayla," Max said, startling her. "Hi, Max," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Why couldn't just be calm? "You found my wallet, I see," he said. "Yes," she answered. "What happened?" she asked. "Can we discuss this over a quick dinner?" he asked. "Please," he added before she could answer. She hesitated, even though she knew that she wanted to see him. "Please say yes," he pleaded when she didn't answer. "The truth is, I want to see you again, Kayla." "That's okay," she said as casually as she could. He asked for her address and they agreed he would pick her up later that evening. Much as she tried to deny it, she could feel the attraction for this man, and when his car pulled into her driveway, she had to still herself to be calm. She picked up her purse and his wallet and walked out briskly. She could not help it but stare at him as he opened the door of the car for her. She took note of the masculine cologne on him and inside his car. He looked at her and smiled as he reversed the car. She smiled back and she could feel her heart start the race. "You look nice," he said, and she responded with a thank you. She surprised herself earlier by the way she took time to make sure she looked absolutely her best. He sat across her at the small dinner table they had chosen. He beckoned to the waitress and they both ordered the restaurant's specialty. "So tell me, Kayla, how did you find my wallet?" he asked with a twinkle in his dark eyes. "You tell me how your wallet just happened to be in my grocery bag," she answered, smiling, enjoying the company of this man who increasingly did not feel like a stranger to her. "It fell in your bag and I left it there," he said. "Really?" she asked without being convinced by his answer. Okay, I confess," he finally said. "I put it there on purpose so that you would call me Kayla," he said, looking deep into her eyes. "I needed to see you again," he said, caressing her face with his eyes. She felt her hair miss a beat. "Why not just ask for my number?" she said. "What if you said no?" he said. "I wasn't taking chances," he answered. "I didn't want the finality of that." "Congratulations for your ingenuity," she said, laughing. "But I could as well have not called you." "But you did, I win," he said jokingly. "I wanted you to think about it first, before you made the call." He added, "That's me, Kayla," he said seriously. "I don't take chances. I see far, far ahead," he added, and she wondered what he meant by that. They enjoyed the steak and fries, and mostly each other's company. They talked about work, and he told her about the architectural project that had brought him to this part of the country. He had the best manners and he seemed very caring. He listened to her, and oh, it was so refreshing. She could not compare him to Ben. By now, Ben would be whining about one thing or another, or trying to make her feel guilty over one thing or another. Her ex was a serious energy drainer. Dinner was soon over, and she could feel the pull towards this man. It was soon time to go home, and as he drove her, she felt totally comfortable. Was this only their first date? "When will I see you again?" he asked, interrupting her thoughts. They were already at her driveway, and he opened the door of the car for her. They were now standing outside her house. He was looking at her with an intensity, and when she opened her mouth to answer, the words came in a whisper. She looked up at him, and their eyes held for a moment. He then pulled her to him, giving her a lingering kiss and holding her close to him for a while. This evening should go on forever, he whispered. The moment was interrupted by the glare of light from the headlights of a neighbor's car, and it drew them apart. "Good night, Kayla," he said, smiling his sensuous smile. "Good night, Max," she said in a daze. She stood at her door and watched him drive away, then opened her door and got into the house. She sank into her sofa and could not help recounting every detail of their time together. She reached out to pick her phone. Jedi must hear about this, she thought, dialing her friend's number. She was bursting to share. Jedi was her friend from work, and actually the only friend she had at this time. Jedi's phone rang for some time, and when there was no answer, she decided just as well. She was not going to share about Max just yet, and for today, she decided to throw cares to the wind and dream of Max all night long. Kayla's resolutions for the year all went forgotten. She had vowed that before she fell in love with a man, she would be very careful. She would not allow herself to fall for a man that easy. But here she was, thinking about Max in every waking moment. Her voice of reason and caution was completely ignored and almost forgotten. It was almost a week now since she had gone on the date with Max, but she could remember every detail. At this moment, all she wanted was to see his call, to hear his voice. When he finally called, telling her that he could not last another day if he did not see her, she felt as if her heart would burst. He had no idea how much her heart was aching to see him too. When he proposed to pick her up that evening and personally cook dinner for her, she was very excited, and of course she agreed. It was a date. As usual, she looked stunning as she waited for him to arrive. When her phone finally rang to announce that he was outside, she rushed out to find him standing tall and handsome, watching her as she came towards him. He took her in his arms and kissed her lightly on her cheek. Her heart fluttered like there were 1,000 butterflies in her chest. She got in the car and off they went. "Will you really be cooking dinner today?" she asked with a teasing voice. "Oh, yes. There's a lot you don't know about Max Timberlake Moke," he said, smiling sideways at her and sending shivers down her spine. Soon they were walking into a modest apartment in a lovely neighborhood. All the lawns were beautifully manicured. She felt like she was walking into a beautiful work of art. "Welcome home," he said, leading her in by her hand. She came into a neat, warm sitting area with cozy seats and a fluffy carpet. As she looked around, trying to take in the rest of the room, he took her in his arms as if he could not wait for them to be alone. His lips met hers in deep kiss. The electricity between them was real. It was like a magnet was pulling them together. "Make yourself comfortable," he said after a few minutes, with a voice full of emotion, pulling away from her. "Dinner will be faster than you think," he said, disappearing into the kitchen. "Need help?" she asked. "Nope," he said, breaking into a whistle. Kayla could not believe what was happening and how fast things were moving. She felt comfortable with everything and could not imagine she had met Max only a few days ago. There were, however, some questions that kept lingering in her mind. Didn't he have a woman in his life? A man of Max's looks and charisma must have dozens of women dying to be with him. She was going to find out today, she thought, as she picked up the remote control from the coffee table, flipping some channels on the television. Just then, a whistling Max walked in carrying a tray loaded with dishes. What an aroma that emanated from the food he was carrying. "There's no way you cooked that food in those few minutes," she exclaimed, looking at him with a quizzical expression. "Did too," he chuckled. "Anyway, truth be told," he said as he placed the tray on the dining table, "I had someone come over earlier to cook the food. Hope you are not disappointed in me," he said. "I already know how crooked you are, Max." "I am not surprised," she said. "The other day it was your wallet in my bag, and now this. I am quite used to your ways," she said humorously. He laughed. "Guilty as charged," he declared. "So who cooked the food?" "Did you invite your girlfriend to come cook for me?" she asked, trying to joke about it. "The only woman in my life is you, Kayla," he said, looking at her. "Is there a man in your life, Kayla?" he asked seriously. "Not at all," she said, her heart beating faster. Was he saying the truth? Could she really be this lucky to meet such a handsome hunk who was unattached? "What are you thinking?" he interrupted her thoughts. "Nothing," she said, smiling sheepishly. "I will tell you what I am thinking," he said, taking her hand and pulling her to her feet, a naughty expression on his face. "What?" she asked, her voice trembling for no apparent reason. I am thinking of kissing you from head to toe, he said, looking serious. Stay, Kayla. Stay with me tonight, he said, pulling her to his chest. She was so tempted to surrender to this man. Oh, so much. You know you want to stay, baby, he coaxed. Max, I must say no today, she said, summoning all her strength. Please understand. Even though she was tempted, she was glad that she still had the strength to say no. She needed to be sure who this man was. Her relationship with Ben had taught her a lot, and as much as she was so attracted to Max, there was still some caution in her. Baby, we have the rest of our lives ahead of us, he said to her relief. And we will have May more dates, right? He said, punctuating every word with a kiss. Oh, she felt the love flow for this man who was so understanding. Yes, Max, she stammered, answering his question. But why do you look so unsure, baby? He teased. I hope you are not afraid of me, he said, looking down at her confused face. Don't be. You will soon find out that I am genuine, he said, smiling and leading her by her hand to the dining table. They ate, enjoying the food and each other's company. It was a seafood platter and it was delicious. They talked freely, learning more and more about each other. Finally, dinner was over and Kayla had to excuse herself. I need to run along. Remember, tomorrow is a working day. Sure, Max said. Is this good night? He asked. She nodded, and he once again took her in his arms, giving her a long kiss. He then led her by the hand, outside, where to his car was parked. When they got to her house, he gave her a tight hug and then led her to her door. She was bursting with happiness. Everything seemed almost too good to be true. That night before she slept, she had a long moment of recounting the details of the evening with Max. This was wonderful. She had never felt more alive. She wanted to be with Max every second of her life. Of that she was sure. She wanted to call and tell him she loved him, but something held her back. She was almost sure that he loved her too. It took every ounce of her strength not to call him tonight. Thoughts of Max filled her mind. It was difficult finding sleep that night. She almost wished she had stayed with him. By the time she woke up the next morning, all she wanted to hear was Max's voice. She wondered why he hadn't called her yet. She was already missing him terribly. He did not seem keen on frequent calls. She picked up her phone to call him but stopped. A thought was forming in her mind. What if she surprised him with an early morning visit? What if she drove by his apartment to say good morning to him? The idea seemed perfect, and the perfect medicine for her aching heart. Dressing up very carefully, she put on her makeup and made her way to her car. It was a bit too early, but if she had to pass by Max's place and still make it to work, she needed to set off early. Getting into her car, her heart was racing just as fast as her car raced down the road. She could just see the look on his face when he saw her, and oh, she was starving for his love. It was not long before she arrived at his apartment. She got out of her car and walked to his door. She knocked lightly, and when there was no response, she rang the bell. Still, there was no answer. Had he already left for work? She wondered. It was pretty early. She hesitated. Maybe the back door was open. She walked around the house bypassing the locked garage door. She knocked on the door and no one answered. She turned the knob and the door opened slightly, but there was a chain from the inside that was still stopping it from the inside. She knocked again, and when there was still no answer, she simply put her hand inside the open louvre next to the door. She easily pulled the chain off the hook and the door opened. With a naughty look on her face and a racing heart, she tiptoed into the house. This was going to be a real surprise. She peeped into the kitchen, then the sitting room, and finally the bedroom. There was definitely no sign of Max. But what surprised her was, there was no sign of him in any other way. Nothing indicated that this was his home. Indeed, there was nothing to show that anyone lived in this house. Not a dustbin, not a laundry basket. The house felt distinctively empty. Curiosity getting the better of her, she decided to investigate. She must have been too obsessed with Max yesterday to notice any of this. She opened the wardrobes, and to her utter surprise, here was not a single item of clothing inside. She looked into the cabinet and went from closet to closet. There was no sign of life in this apartment. With her face feeling hot and her heart beating wildly, she rushed to the kitchen, and there also she found no sign of life. Panic-stricken, she wondered if she got into the wrong apartment. But again, this was definitely the apartment that Max brought her to last evening. The crazy realization settled with her that no one actually lived here. The empty house screamed at her. She was duped. Max did not live here. Her head started swimming, and she had to steady herself with the kitchen chair. Her mind felt confused and unable to think for some time. There must be some mistake, some explanation. She had almost given herself to this man in sheer trust. She trusted him. Why is this happening? She asked herself in confusion. She must find out now. She must confront him. She needed answers. With trembling hands, she took her phone and dialed his number. Immediately, someone answered. "Who is this?" She stammered on hearing the woman's voice on the other end. "May I speak to Max's?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Sorry, he is in the shower," the woman answered. "Is that his home?" she asked, summoning all strength. "Yes, I am his wife," the woman answered. Kayla immediately disconnected the call and sank to the floor. She did not know how long she sat there crying. All that she could hear were her sobs echoing in the empty apartment. Pain and sorrow turned into anger and bitterness as the full realization of his deception set in. He had lied. The cheater had lied to her just so that he could sleep with her. So this was his seduction nest. She thought, looking around. She had fallen right into his trap, his deception. And of course, the whole relationship was too good to be true. She got up, quickly wiping her tears, and walked to the open back door in a daze. She stumbled to her car, and just as she was about to open the door, she heard her phone ringing. She looked, and it was Max. The nerve he had to call her. She backed her car and drove away. She tossed the phone on the passenger seat and climbed into the driver's seat. She backed her car and drove away. She was not going to go to work in such a messed-up state. She drove back to her house. The tears flowed down her cheeks freely as she drove, and she did not bother to wipe them away. She let the sobs out in the privacy of her car. What a fool she had been. How could she have believed him? What an evil man he was, putting up all the deception, pretending to love her. Meanwhile, her phone continued to ring, and every time she checked, it was Max. The hell with him. He really thought he could get away with it. Well, that was it. She would have nothing to do with him again or with any other man. She should have learnt her lesson with Ben. Again, how was she going to continue staying in this town without bumping into him? From the way he was calling her, it was obvious he had no idea he was busted. She had come to this town for some peace and quiet, and to put her life back together again after the abusive relationship with Ben. Obviously, this was not going to happen anymore. She had only managed to get things worse. There were no options for her. There was only one thing to do, as fast as possible. She parked her car and got out hurriedly. She grabbed her phone, which started ringing again. This time, it was not Max. It was Jedi, her workmate. Jedi probably wanted to know why Kayla had not reported to work yet. First things first, she would talk to Jedi later. She opened her door and headed straight to her bedroom. She grabbed 2 suitcases and started packing her clothes. Her phone rang, and it was still Max. She ignored it and continued packing. She had nothing to say to him. All she wanted was to get as far away from him as possible. They had no relationship. It was all a lie, a big deception. Tears continued to flow as she packed. Suddenly, life seemed to have no meaning for her. Thinking of what she had just discovered was too painful to bear, and why did he keep calling her? Didn't he know that his game was over? All done, she put the 2 suitcases in the boot of her car. She would return the car to the dealer and see if they could come to an agreement, because she had made a few payments on it and only used it a short time. She would then catch the next train back home. In all her pain, she envisioned her mother's happiness when she returned home. Her mother had never supported her idea to leave town. That brought her some comfort. She got into her car and reversed it into the driveway. She was about to step on the accelerator when she noticed a familiar car zooming towards her home. It was none other than Max, the last person she wanted to see at this moment. His car slowed down on the driveway, and she frantically tried to drive past. She wanted nothing to do with him. His car stopped, and he stepped out, running towards her car. He seemed distressed and kept calling out to her. She swerved on one side to avoid knocking him down and went directly into one of the trees that lined both sides of the driveway. She could only remember seeing the tree too close and all went black. As if from a distance, Kayla could hear her mother's voice, but she could not tell what she was saying. How come she couldn't remember traveling home, and yet she was sure her mother was with her? "Mom!" she said, forcing the words out as a throaty groan. She opened her eyes, and the light seemed very harsh on the eyes. She had to close them again. "Kayla, are you awake? Can you hear me?" her mum asked. She could tell that her mum was crying. "Yes, Mum," Kayla said, looking around to see several faces looking down at her. She smiled as she recognized her younger sister. And then there was Max's face also looking down at her, a concerned look on his face. She quickly looked away, and she suddenly recalled some of the events of a few days ago. Taking a keener look around, she realized that she was in a hospital. What happened? She asked the question to no one in particular. The private room she was in was full of the fragrance of flowers, and when she looked around she could see them all over. "You were brought here by this wonderful gentleman," her mum said. "He is the one who contacted us. By the time we came, you were settled here and had the best doctors taking care of you." Her mum continued smiling fondly at Max. "What happened to me?" she asked him, her curiosity stronger than her hatred for him. "You knocked a tree, your windscreen caved in, and you sustained some very bad injuries on your head and shoulder. You have been unconscious for a week, Kayla," he added. "I am so happy you are awake," her sister interjected. Kayla avoided Max's eyes all through. She had no business with a married man, she reminded herself. The pain in her head and the drugs she had taken made her drowsy and she dozed off. When she opened her eyes, Max was the only one in the room. "Where is my mum?" she asked him. "She and your sister went shopping," he said. "Kayla, look at me," he said in a stern tone. "What happened? Why were you leaving town without telling me, and why didn't you answer my calls? I am still in the dark. I can see you are angry at me. What did I do? Kayla, tell me please. First, does your wife know you are here, or are you deceiving her like you deceived me?" she asked sarcastically. "What wife?" he asked, looking genuinely shocked. "I am not married, Kayla, you know that." "I spoke to her, so you can stop pretending. She said she was your wife." Kayla said, her eyes flashing with anger. "Oh my God, did she do that again?" "That must be Martha, my maid's daughter," he said, gritting his teeth. "This is not the first time she has claimed to be my wife and gotten me into trouble. I am fed up with her, and this is it. I will send her out of my home for good." "So you have a maid? And where do you keep her?" "Certainly not in your empty apartment," she said, her voice loaded with sarcasm. "The apartment where you take fools like me, pretending to be in love. The game is over with me. You deceived me and I fell for it. But not anymore," Kayla said passionately, her voice full of pain. "Kayla, did you go back to that apartment?" he asked. "Yes, and I realized you never lived there. You lied, you deceived me," she said, bursting into tears. "That's not true," he said, trying to take her in his arms. "Get away from me," she screamed. "Kayla, listen, I can explain. I live in the big castle up the hill. You know the castle, everyone does. Morris Moke, the oil tycoon, was my father. But as you know, he is now gone. I only came to live here this year because of my new assignment. There's still a lot I need to share with you. And I will. I did not want to scare you away, Kayla. I could tell you were not that kind of girl, the kind that is attracted to wealth. You have no idea what I have suffered in the hands of gold-digger women, especially after my father died and I became the sole heir of my father's fortune. Baby, I still have a lot to tell you. I had sworn that it will be a long, long time before I involved myself with any woman. Until I met you, Kayla, you changed everything and I just wanted to be an ordinary guy. That's why I rented that apartment. It's true I hardly ever stay there. I was going to tell you everything, I swear," he said passionately. "And I am certainly not married," he added. "You mean you live in the big castle, all alone?" She stammered. "Yes, but there are many workers, so it's not lonely," he said. "But you could have just told me Max," she said. "Please try to understand and see my point of view," he said. "I wanted to make you mine first, Kayla. I did not want to take any chances with you, Kayla. I need you. You are the only woman in my life. I can't live without you," he pleaded passionately. "I am sorry, but I don't think I want to continue with the relationship. You hurt me too much." She was just finishing her sentence when her mum and sister came into the room. Her mum was a tiny lady with a big mane of hair just like Kayla's. She was middle-aged but still very pretty. It was obvious that she, Kayla's sister, and Max had hit it off right away. "Kayla, you never told me about Max," her mum gushed. "He is the kindest and the most caring man I have ever seen. He never left your side all through the time you were unconscious. Everyone loves him. You are a lucky girl," she said, winking at Max. Kayla wished her mum would keep quiet and change the subject. If only she knew that things were over between her and Max. "Kayla, thanks to you, we are staying at the big castle until you recover," her sister said excitedly. Kayla was scheduled to be discharged from hospital at the end of the week. Max had arranged for her to stay at his castle until she was fully recovered. "What?" Kayla exclaimed, trying to sit up. The pain in her neck forced her to flop back on her pillow. "No, I'm going home with you and Mom," she said firmly. "Max will never allow it," her sister said in a matter-of-fact voice. "Now he was controlling my life." She thought angrily, but decided to keep quiet. Suddenly she felt so tired. All this fighting was getting to her, and she drifted off into some kind of half-sleep. She visualized Max, and she could see how much her mum and sister trusted him. Could it be that he truly cared, and that all he had said to her was true? What if she was actually mistaken and he truly cared for her? "A penny for your thoughts," she heard her sister say, as if from far away. "You were thinking about Max, weren't you?" she said, giggling. "Yes, but not what you are thinking, you naughty girl," she answered. Just then, her mum came in. "Today, Max will be away," she announced. "So it is just me and my girls," she said. A slight wave of disappointment passed through Kayla, and she could not believe it. Was she already warming to the deceiver? She asked herself. Her mind was telling her one thing, but her heart was feeling something else. That evening, Kayla decided to think over her relationship with Max. He already had the stamp of approval from both her mother and sister. She avoided the subject of Max and even pretended to be asleep. The more she thought about him, the more she knew that she would be a fool to dismiss him, and yet his actions, whatever his reasons were, had hurt her greatly, almost costing her her life. She could not remember ever being a careless driver. She must have been in a terrible state of mind that morning. Max did care about her, and he was a very responsible person. He had taken care of all the bills and made sure she got the best medical care. He was still committed to her and wanted to work things out with her. If he didn't care, he could easily have left her in the care of her mother, sister, and the doctors. He actually didn't have to be at the hospital. But she still didn't feel ready to forgive him. It was not going to be that easy. She should actually have taken some more time before getting into a relationship after the painful breakup with Ben. She would suggest to Max that they take it easy, stay apart for some time, she decided as she drifted off to sleep. She was woken up by some noise in her room. It was her mom and sister right there at her side, but Max was nowhere to be seen. Ordinarily, he was at the hospital by daybreak. She wanted him to come so that she could tell him of her decision. Then her mum and sister would stop all this endless talk about how amazing he was. "Where is Max?" she asked her mum. "Don't worry, I know he will come soon. I know you miss him," her mum teased. Kayla turned away. Her mum had no idea about her tumultuous thoughts. But where was he? When he finally walked into the room around 4 p.m., she was full of strange, mixed feelings. Seeing him and his strong presence made her feel weak, her resolutions shaken. "Where have you been?" her mum asked him in an alarmed tone. "Just taking care of important business," he said with a twinkle in his eye. He then settled at Kayla's bedside. "You look so much better today," he said, smiling, loving. "I feel that way," she said, trying to be calm. "And did you think about what I told you yesterday?" "Kayla, do you really think it was a deception on my part?" he asked her, looking deep in her eyes. She turned around to see if her sister and mum were listening, and to her surprise, she realized she was alone with him in the room. "I love you, Kayla." He said the words she had longed to hear all through their short relationship. How was she going to tell him what she had decided when all she felt at this moment was love for him? "Kayla, look at me. Do you think I am deceiving you when I say that I love you? I want to spend the rest of my life loving you," he said. This startled her, and she looked into his eyes. "Yes, I want you to be my wife," he said, picking up her hand and looking deep into her eyes. "I almost lost you, and I'm not taking that risk again. I love you," he said again. "And I love you, Max." The words came out as if on their own. She loved him, and there was nothing she could do about it. He smiled. "I know, Kayla, I know what you feel. I know that you love me, I know," he said, bending to kiss her on the lips. Before she knew it, he was on one knee by her bedside, and from his pocket, he brought out a small gold box. He opened it, and inside was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. "Will you marry me, Kayla?" he asked, his dark eyes intense. "Oh, yes, Max," she said, her eyes filling with tears of joy. All her resolutions about ending their relationship were forgotten and buried in an eternal abyss. He slipped the ring on her finger slowly and kissed her gently. She could hear people clapping from behind. She did not hear her mum and sister enter the room. They both rushed to her side to admire her ring. What she did not know is that Max had taken his chances, and all day long he had been planning a big engagement party at the castle. She looked at the ring continuously. All that mattered at this moment was the fact that she was going to marry the man she was in love with. It was a wonderful feeling. Her family was as excited as she was. One would think they were all getting married. This also happened to be the day that she was leaving the hospital. It was a happy time for everyone. That evening, her mum helped her into a beautiful dress they had bought her on the day they went shopping. She looked absolutely stunning as they left the hospital. Max held her hand, and her mum and sister followed behind as they finally stepped into the beautiful castle. Everything was set in their honor, and there were cheers and catcalls all over as Max showed off his beautiful bride-to-be. She looked up at him, and their gaze met. With the familiar, loving smile, their lips met in a gentle, loving kiss. To anyone who's faced heartbreak, remember this: love has a way of finding us when we least expect it. Kayla thought she'd never love again after her pain, but she opened her heart, and life surprised her with a love that was even more beautiful. Your story isn't over. Stay open, stay hopeful, and believe in the magic of second chances.